All right. Well, guys, thanks for joining us. This is a presentation for Tube Feeding Awareness Week. And I want to introduce my friend Tyler. Tyler and I go back a long time to the summer camps of Wainema, where we did many stupid things to try to impress girls and dance on stages and who knows what else.
This is worth it.
So worth it. When then later we even were roommates in college, and yet we still talk to each other. So miracles never cease. We've traveled abroad together.
Mm-hmm.
That was fun. My first time in Thailand was with Tyler.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had a lot of great things. But recently, Tyler's and his wife Tabitha have been kind of special people in our lives, because as we've taken this journey with Dorothy and with Teddy, they were our first friends who had to deal with what it means to have your kid on a tube feed. And I'm going to let Tyler talk about that a little bit more, but this is my buddy, Tyler Colson.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Yeah, so, man, we had a normal pregnancy for the most part until, I don't know, it seemed like 33 weeks or so. All of a sudden, they were like, huh. I mean, he's small. He was always small in the womb for when they did all those measurements that they can do, and ended up at 33. They were like, yeah, we need to keep an eye on this. And then at like 36, they were like, yeah, so if you could come back at like 2, would 2 be all right to come back today? To
like 2 p.m. that
2
day.
2 p.m. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And so, because we don't know why he's not growing at the speed he should be growing at, basically.
Oh.
And so...
And this is your first kid, right?
First
this
kid.
Is the first kid.
Yeah.
You have no idea what's going on.
Yeah. We don't know how to do a lot of things, because we're not adults, really, like, at that point.
How old were you guys?
I mean, we were... mid-20s, but it's still, like...
Still, yeah.
I mean... I still have to, at that age, still having to be explained to from my dad, who's an insurance agent, like what insurance is, right?
Right.
So I don't know things in this world about adulting, because at that point it was like, drinking on the weekend type of thing. Right. And now all of a sudden we've made this great life decision that, at the time we knew was going to be life-changing. So
right.
All that being said, at 2:00 come back, or noon or something like that. I mean, we literally went home, we did some laundry, went to Baja Fresh, and then went to go have the baby. And
were you guys in Oregon at this time?
We're in Oregon.
Yeah.
So we end up taking the time to just to do chores and then go to the hospital. So we had Zach, I don't know, 36 hours later ish. And so
how many weeks is this into the pregnancy?
So 36 is what what we're at.
Okay.
So
not super preemie, but still way earlier than
Yeah. And it was almost immediately, I mean, it was, how do we get calories into him the whole time? Wow. And so and it was fine, but after a few months it ended up being that they're like, yeah, there's something, even though you're trying to get as much food into him, we need to supplement that. And so we did the NG tube for, I don't know how long.
Yeah, talk because this part, okay, because you're 25 at this time, I'm 26 or whatever, and this tripped me out, because you were the first, because we're all just kind of kids of that back then.
Yeah.
So when you would tell me stories about this, I'd be like, how do you guys even do it? Which to me now is hilarious, but at the time, we couldn't believe. So tell me some of these. An NG tube is what?
Well, the NG tube is through the nose all the way down into the stomach, and so at that point we were already getting, I think that was, we were doing bolus feedings, so it was all through gravity, right? And so those ones would like go like that, and and then he'd throw up. And so that was always the issue, that we were going too quickly on. I'm gonna set my timer because there's for our cameras.
Gotcha. No, I'm with you.
But yeah, we ended up having to, like, figure out the right level to hold the bolus and how quickly to do it. And we wanted to do it in, like, we had to be all scientific, it's like all the things that you shouldn't normally need to try and figure out with a kid type of thing.
Yeah.
Like how quickly stuff needs to go in to him.
Yeah.
Opposed to just like throwing food down or like breastfeeding and letting them like regulate, right, how much they're getting in. Right. And so he was always throwing up, and we were always having to clean that up. But yeah, after it was like, it had to have been 3 or 4 months. Then it turned into the he went in for a nut, like just for that testing, like, hey, he's still not growing at the level he needs to grow. Well, they were listening to him at the time, and they were like, oh, he has a heart murmur, and so we need to look into that too. And so they started looking into that and realized that it was an aseptal defect, or an ASD, which is like as I understand it, it was not one it was okay, like people could have ASDs their whole life, but this one was like much bigger. So there was that, and then as well, he had what's called the diaphragmatic hernia. And so that diaphragmatic hernia can either be on the left side or the right side, and that's really where it's the lining that separates the intestines from the heart and the lungs. And it's so like dire that if it's on a certain side, because I'm not a doctor, like whatever side that the intestines are on, if they find out about that with children in the womb, they will do surgery in the womb for that. And so he had the even rarer version of all of that, which was on the right side, I think, and that was where his liver was being pushed up. Usually it's on the opposite side, where the intestines go up and struggle, and it like the intestines go up and wrap around the heart or the lungs, and so that's where it can kill them. And typically it's within kids with Down syndrome that end up having that that diaphragmatic hernia. But somehow he got the even rarer version, and his liver was basically just plugging the hole. And so, so they were like, well, we need to put a patch in for that. And because of the fact that he's not getting the calories he needs, because there was certain studies that I was reading that said that diaphragmatic hernias on the opposite side really affected their GERD and so their reflux. And so, and because he was throwing up, we were like, it's got to be something like that. And the doctors were like, no. And it actually did help once they did the surgery for that a little bit. So, but at the time, they were like, well, we can do that surgery, and because of that, and you being on an NG tube already, let's do the G tube at the same time.
Right. That's right. I remember that.
And so we did those two things at the same time, and it was, I think the hardest part about going through that whole situation was not knowing how to advocate for yourself. And that's like the hardest thing to like learn, because my mom would be in the room and she'd be like, whoa, wait a second, like, what about this? And we'd be like, okay, doctor, whatever. Right. And the thing is like, when we had because the diaphragmatic hernia, we can't tell that it could be in there or not right now. Like, sure. I don't know, because it wasn't visible for us, but the G tube was. And the hard part was, they said not being a good advocate, I didn't know the right questions to ask, and
who does? Who does at that point?
Especially when you first start off, because it's
Exactly.
like you don't know what to do. And I ended up the doctor, the surgeon. The thing with surgeons that we can all like agree on is they are they love to talk to people. Is really they love
they're super good at being people.
They're people.
They'd be a good announcer. Like just make you feel warm and cuddly. That's what I get about surgeons.
They got into medicine to connect with people. That's their love language.
If people don't get the sarcasm we're laying on, then we just gotta say that's sarcasm we're using right now.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I've had a couple of amazing surgeons who are amazing people, but in general, the rule is surgeons are very, as we like to say, surgical in their feelings as well.
Yes. Yeah. And so because of that, that we even complained to the hospital because he said, hey, we're gonna put in the Mickey G tube, and so which is a fairly the most common one. Well, at the time, I don't know G tube
Still is.
Yeah. So, but they didn't tell us that there was going to be this like stitched in tube that was like a pre G tube that they ended up putting in, and so if you're watching this, you've probably already gone through that whole surgery anyways, but the problem is that in this case, and I don't know why, the surgeon acted like he had told us, which he had 100% not. He had showed us the Mickey, but didn't show us this other one, and it was like 3 stitches into it, and it was basically like an actual tube coming off the out of the stomach, and that's where we put everything in. And so you put that in, they put that in for like 2 weeks or something like that to let it heal, and the stomach lining to basically like heal or adhere to the skin. And so we didn't know any of that. And so we finally like opened up the bandage and looked at it, and we're like, that's not what we were sold. And so yeah, that's where it was like, oh, okay, this is how we need to advocate to be able to talk to people, I guess, or talk to the surgeons, or talk to the doctors, or talk to the nurses. I mean, nurses are always like the best advocate, it seems like, but because the doctor kind of just leaves half the time, and you show, but the nurses are the ones that are there all the time.
Right. Exactly. They have the more holistic care in mind.
Right.
Yeah. The one thing that is interesting is always asking, what our other options are, and that if nothing else, if someone watches this and gets that from this, that's amazing, because there are always other options. Right. And even with we've had the Mickey and the Minnie and a couple of the other G tubes at this point, but frankly, the question is, what are the options out there? Because there are options. So, and talk to me about some of the stories you tell me with Zach and the NG tube before we get past that to the G tube, because it was pretty easy to do that, right? He never pulled it out, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I tried to get all scientific and like do all the tape in the right spot along his nose so that but I mean, he's a baby, so they're like all they do is move and wiggle and squirm, and he just knew how to like hook that thing and then rip it out. And it was always like at the moment where I'd be like leaving, and it would be like a 15-minute drive back home or something like that, and I'd look back and it'd just be out of his of his mouth, and so, or his nose. So so like it was always the most inopportune times, and I never got good at putting it in because there's a whole like technique to it. And I mean, we did have good nurses that would come in and teach us, and my wife Tabitha, she ended up really getting a good handle on how to do it. But also by chance, the insurance that we had or whatever, that nurse was kind of on call to come to our house, and so she would come. Nice. She would come occasionally, like whenever that happened. So we only ended up having to do it a couple of times, like
that's not bad.
4 times maybe. So
that's not bad.
Not too bad.
All things considered, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just remember you telling us those stories when we came to visit, and I was, you're like, yeah, because he's just perfectly flipping out.
Yeah,
I
it was like,
oh
man, like I wanted to put tape in his nose so that he wouldn't get it, but he was so good at it. So
I'm pretty sure Teddy on the way home from the hospital, it was out before we got home.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So that's.
And it's so funny because it's like it doesn't matter. Like to a certain
No.
extent, it
No,
doesn't
it
matter
doesn't.
that he pulled it out, and like it's kind of like a little bit of, I'm sure, a little bit of a relief for a while to have it out.
Yeah. You do feel bad like putting it in and out all the time because you don't want to like damage anything, of course. But
Yeah.
still, yeah, there's got to be that.
Yeah.
So so then you get the tube sticking out for a couple weeks, and then you have the G tube. What was how long? Talk to me about using the G tube and kind of from there out.
So I don't know what's a good G tube hole or not, but mainly with with what the surgeon did or not or whatever. I mean, the kids are growing, so I don't know how that hole grows with the Mickey at the same time. But like,
Right.
I don't know about your experience, but like we went through so many onesies, so many pads of like gauze because we would fill him up, and our system was we were regimented for a year, almost a year and a half. We like when he got from getting the NG tube to the G tube for a year and a half, we were regimented every 4-hour feedings, and
Wow.
and so 4 to 6 hours or something like that.
Wow.
And so it ended up, I think it was 6, more of 6. And so because of that, I got up at
Are these all gravity feeds?
no, once I got the G tube, we were doing the kangaroo pump.
Yeah.
And so
Sure.
that pump, because you can set it how fast we were going, and we ended up because of how bad his reflux was.
Right.
We were doing a good 45-minute feed, which is a lot less than Dottie, but
but different.
But it was. But then we would have to have him like upright position or holding him
Yeah.
or something like that.
Oh gosh, I can't imagine doing a Dottie ever.
And so for that whole year and a half, I was waking up at midnight, and then feeding for 45 minutes.
And then Tabs did 4.
And then, no, she would do like the 10. Yeah, she'd do the 8, and then she'd do like the 6 in the morning or something like that. I was doing the midnight or 2 in the morning or something like that. And so I would stay up. I would be up for 2 hours each night for a year and a half. And so I got through a lot of Netflix at that time. And
was Zach awake this time, or was he asleep?
No, he was asleep the whole time.
Yeah,
I played. I went and got headphones so I could listen to the TV or play video games. And so like, I would be on, playing some game and with some like 20-year-old college students, and they'd be like, "Where are you from? What college are you going to?" Like, not.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so ends up, so for a year and a half, I never slept a full night, except for like, I went on a camping trip during that time for like 3 nights or 2 nights, something like that. That was the only time I slept a full night because of that feeding. And, but that was the problem, was that he was throwing up. So it was just a total, calorie count, because we needed to get as much in to feed him, to get him to grow. And
so we haven't talked about do you know why couldn't he take the calories? Have we talked about that?
It was just the reflux, but it wasn't like, so because of the reflux and the amount of throw up, we'd be like, what are we going to do? I mean, he'd throw up what looked like his entire meal from the pouch. And so it'd be like, well, okay, do we start over? Do we give him half full? Like what, and so it was this constant worry, like, are we getting enough in him at that point? But and then also it was also leaking out his at the G-tube hole, and so
Sure.
constantly like looking down and being like, oh, he leaked out. How much did he leak out from there? And playing that like game. So it was it's just funny now because like, well, when we had our second, it was like, he didn't eat a meal, like they're kids, they don't eat a meal sometimes, like they don't, but it was like it wasn't an option with like Zach, and so because of that,
exactly right,
like we had to figure that out. And so yeah, it was a year and a half of just constantly like focusing in on like counting calories, like doing the reverse kind of calorie counting that people normally do.
Right, 100%, exactly right.
And so yeah, that's where we were always dealing with.
So you said year and a half. What happened at the end of this year and a half?
So basically at that point, I mean, he was starting to take food by mouth. And so
awesome,
because like the problem is our regiment basically took him out of like feeding by mouth. And so we would try to like breastfeed or go and like give him foods, but like he would just take like one bite, and it was just basically teaching him that he was always full, and so he was never like hungry. And so because of that, at that time we got he had his second surgery. Actually, to walk this all back, he got his he didn't have his second surgery at that point. We I'm not sure why, but it was at that point like he was kind of growing enough. He was in the all right percentile, because at that point he was at like the third percentile or second percentile or something like that.
Right.
But his head was at like 100 or something like that. It was he was just like this bobblehead, and
like an orange and a toothpick.
Yeah, and so he and he's walking around, and so we're same thing that you have is like, how do you get a kid to sit for 45 minutes type of thing with a G-tube in to feed him. And we were doing all right, but at that point it was getting real hard to be able to keep him like situated. But he ended up, he just started to eat a little bit, but he just didn't have any interest in any of it. And
interesting.
Because he just didn't know that was the feeling of hunger. And so we basically said, okay, well, it was like the weekend before Easter or something like that, around that time. And so we were like, we're just not going to feed him. We're just going to stop feeding him and only offer him food by mouth and see what he does. Like, we can always go back. We'll have it ready just in case,
right,
but we'll see what he does. And at that point, he started to like, okay, like feel what hunger was. And
weird.
And so that's where he started to transition off of that. And so then it started with like, then we went down to like, I don't know, only daytime feeding, and then cut it to like 2 times during that day, and then 1 time, and then we were completely off of it. And it still took, I think, a month or 2, something like that, to like really get it down.
Wow.
But then at that point he ended up being able to. It was like he had grown enough. He had hit most of his landmarks that he needed to hit, and so it was time basically to have. We kept it in even after that for another like I think 3 months, and then did the next surgery to be able to stitch it all up.
Wow. So they had to basically see for 3 months that he kept up his weight and that. Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. That must have been a good day to for that one.
Oh yeah, it was. it was weird. I just remember that weekend being just so strange to be able to have him, to see him go from, like, because we had luckily, just by chance, we were, I was not, luckily, I was not making enough money. And so we were on
I know that game.
We were on the Oregon Health Plan. And because of that, I can't remember the name of the supplement, but I mean, it was like
Elecare?
It was like $50 or $60, like a can. So it started with like a, I don't know. Anyways, but because of that, certain things I've just like deleted from my mind.
Yeah.
Because it's like, why not? But that's where it was like, we would have never been able to like get this high quality, like per ounce, so something like 24 calories per ounce type of like stuff. Because when they first started them, I mean, they were trying them at like, it was like 11 or 8 or something like that per ounce. So
that's right.
So I just remember that weekend being so like weird, it just being weird to not have him be on a regimen like that we were just sticking to so heavily.
Yeah. Crazy, huh?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Oh man, what a ride. And then your second son, no medical complications.
No, no issues.
You had to learn how to feed a kid like normally.
Yeah. And had to be like, especially when he was, like 1 year old, where just kids they'll just skip a meal. They just don't eat, and that's just how they are. And we would just be like freaked out about it.
Same with Teddy. We're like, he eats a lot of food.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, oh, because he actually eats. Right. This is different.
Yeah.
Looking back, what are some things you kind of wish you knew that you know now? And you've talked about it a little bit. You could go into more on that or something else. But things you wish you knew then that you know now.
A lot of it was intimidating, like G-tubes, especially when you have the Mickey. What I was fearful of, and I could be totally wrong about this, but I was fearful of, and it happened, I don't know, 2 or 3 times where he did pull out the Mickey. And I was like, what does that like mean, type of thing? And like,
I only laugh because I know it's not as big of a deal as it feels like.
It just feels like a big deal.
It feels like a big deal, exactly.
And it's like one of these things that like, you've got this little human sitting there, and they just did something on a thing that's like sticking out of them like a cyborg, and like, you're like, what do I do? And and every time it was just like, just drain the little bolus of water and stick it back in,
lube it up, stick it back in, terrifying,
fill it up. And so it's like, it's not as intimidating as it looks. And so there's that. But like I said before, I mean, being an advocate, learning to be an advocate is a skill that you have to learn quickly. And because you're in that place of, you don't know what you don't know. It's not you don't, it's not like you're like, well, I know that there's this stuff out here. It's just like, I don't know what the right question is. And so when you have a surgeon that may seem like distant or like just being forceful with the situation, like, be okay with stepping up and being a little prima donna-ish and just being like, no, you need to not like say those words to me. You kind of have to be a little bit of a Karen to like, to like the surgeons, especially to the surgeons. That's what I felt like, and I'm not trying to push all surgeons down, but
no.
They
saved our kids' lives, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
I mean, like we're grateful to them, but the same breath,
exactly.
Even though we're mad at them also.
Yeah, but they've they've done this 500 times and they forget about the fact that this is the first time that we're going through that thing that they went through 15 years ago or 10 years ago type of thing. Like, we don't know what we don't know. And so then they sit there and it's like, a lot of times they don't have good skills of say beating you to the bush, of saying like, I know you're going to ask this, like, this is what I would ask. Like, so that's always a question that I started asking, is like, well, what, like, especially to nurses, like, what would you do in this situation?
Nice. That's a good one.
Or asking the surgeon, like, what have I not asked that you wish I should have asked in this consultation? Question. Because or what am I missing? What may I be missing in this situation? Because they oftentimes they've got their spiel, and it's almost a script at that point where they come in and say, "Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. I gotta go eat." Like, and that's what they want to go do. But it's you have to like slow them down half the time. That's what I felt like. I had to just like, okay, stop. Like, come in the room, hang out a little bit, and let's sit and talk, opposed to like you standing by the doorway and being like, "You good?" and then walking away type of thing. So learning to be an advocate, and if you can, have a good family member or friend be in the room with you, because they are an objective bystander, that they will ask those questions that you will be a deer in the headlights and not know what to ask. And then later on, it's like, okay, did the surgeon mess up by not telling me that there was going to be this other G-tube in him? And the reason we were really upset was the fact that my mom was in the room, and she did like ask questions that I would have never have thought to ask. And so like those sorts of situations, even though that could have been avoided if he had been more forthcoming in the fact that we didn't know what we didn't know, but it's going to be able to help you. So I like, as much as you want to go through this alone, in the sense of especially the surgeries, take the time to bring in like one or two other people in the room, and then write. That was the other thing, is write down your questions that we tried to write down as many questions as we could before we had those consultations, because you'd forget. You'd always forget, and they walk around out the room and be like, "Oh, I forgot." And then you're never going to see them before the surgery, until like they're wheeling the kid back and you're like, "Oh, by the way, what about?"
No, that's exactly right. I think asking what other options do I have is a great, like, you're exactly like, having that objective third party, which is so helpful. Objective third party that you know is in your corner. Asking other doctors and nurses around there, because in our situation, it was like, if we talked to the GI team before, it would have been a way easier decision for what we had to do. I think all that is just figure out, keep asking, and because you don't know. And I think it's not that slow them down is a huge thing to think about. Like, just slow down. You don't have to make the decision right away. I mean, there are some situations where it's literally life or death and you don't have time for it. But those situations, usually you're just signing over to make it happen.
Especially with a G-tube. Like with a G-tube, it's not
usually not life or death to get that in right away.
Right.
Yeah. Like literally the least of all the surgeries I had with Dorothy, but still an important one to keep her going forward. I still remember something you said to me, because one of the part of our story with Dorothy is just we had the choice whether or not she lived or not, which still is mind blowing. But I still remember what you told. You said, "I'll never judge anyone because no one was in there when the surgeons talked to you and the way they talked to you and how they said it." And that still brings me to tears all the time, because I still remember, like, it was so hard. The way they talk to you, it's almost like you need to do it this way or you're a bad person at some point. Right. And I remember you saying that to me. I'm like, thinking, yeah, that's what it felt like. But then after we talked to a few people and we still, and the one thing I will give credit to our surgeons, they didn't flinch an eye when we chose the other thing rather than what they suggested. So thankfully, because that would have crushed us. But then when we talked to the GI doctor like 2 weeks later, like, oh no, a lot of people do this whole time. I'm like, where were you?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Where were you 2 weeks ago? Or a week ago? My timeline gets a little fuzzy now, but I think that's exactly right. Having those questions and really trying to figure out who can help me ask questions. And those nurses, I remember some of those nurses had way more experience than some of the doctors. We had this one nurse who she actually retired while we were there with Dorothy. And when she spoke, everyone else listened. It was the craziest thing. Like, because at the hospital they had like the attending, the fellow, the residents, and then they had the people who are still in school. And it was crazy because when they literally said, "What would you do?" And here she is, the nurse, telling all these doctors what she'd do. And they said, "That's a great idea. We should do that." Because it really is. You're the only one who can be the holistic caretaker of your kid. Because the surgeon sees what they see, the doctors see what they see, but you are the only one who can be all things for your kid. So you have to keep all those things straight. So I think what you said is exactly right, and something I wish I also had brought in more when I had both my kids in the hospital. So, yeah. Well, Tyler, any other encouragements for people who happen to, let's say their kids just have NJ or a G tube? Any other encouragement you give them?
I think the hardest, and this is me being like hyper hypocritical in this situation, and so
bring it on.
Is our biggest thing was like, because like I'm saying is we thought it was because he had this diaphragmatic hernia, but after it got fixed, it was like he still was throwing up a whole bunch.
Right.
So that's the kicker is we don't really have an answer of why he needed to go on a G2.
Wow.
And
still to this day.
So to this day, we still don't really have like, well, it's this syndrome or this, that, or the other, right? And there's so many syndromes and so many like things and reasons that kids move into adults that have G tubes. And that was the thing is like, we could only find, I mean, the internet was around, so it wasn't like, the early 90s and nothing was like we couldn't get real information. Like I could get medical stuff, I could get medical journals, I could get like studies, and we could be on forums, but like the hardest part, and like don't feel discouraged if you haven't been able to like pinpoint a reason why that is the case, like why the G tube is the option or the like the necessary thing.
Right.
And don't feel discouraged if like whatever rare reason that may be that you may not find that exact situation to be like, well, I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to, like, because we had this, my wife was always feeling frustrated, and I was like, the hardest part about this, especially for where we were, was the fact that, like, in the end, when we looked online, there wasn't a whole lot of information about kids with diaphragmatic hernias or just like needed a random G tube type of thing. Sure. And so it was like, but if those, and I'm sure there's those parents and people that were out there, but they just moved on. I mean, like after the G tube was done, they moved on, and they weren't back at like moving back into the community to have discussions and be like, this is our experience and this is what we went through. Right. And so we could only find things like my wife connected with more people online within the Facebook groups and other forums, but don't, like, if something is like super rare or there's a piece of it, the unknown is like scary, but it's not the thing that like you should necessarily focus in on. It's the like, what's the next step?
Yeah.
What's the next thing? Because like, of course you want to think about how to get your child off of G-tube, but I mean, like all my research, I kept running into adults that had G-tubes like their entire life, and there's nothing wrong with them, like in the sense that like there's nothing wrong with having a G-tube as an adult, but it was really hard because they were in the same boat that like they didn't know why that was the case. But it's like, okay, we'll just put one step forward, and don't feel discouraged if your exact situation, you can't find any information off of. Take other people's ones and learn from those and adapt it to your situation. But like, if it's an unknown, it's an unknown, and like focus in on the next step. Like, what do you need to do? What's tomorrow like? What's to like? It's because I'm always forward thinking and want to like be like, well, what's 5 years down the road going to be like? And I wanted to do that with Zach, but like in the end, I can't. Like, I just need to focus in on today and let tomorrow be tomorrow, to a certain extent. So yeah, that's me being hypercritical because I haven't spent much time within the community after he got the G-tube out.
Well, true, but you and Tabs are very encouraging to Megan and I.
Yeah, and Tabitha's spent time with other families, and she's much more generous than I in that respect. And,
hey man, you got kids. No one's got time for anything when you got kids. No one's got any judgment against you when you're raising kids. Let's just be real about that.
Yeah.
And honestly, but I just remember because you had these issues so young as a 25-year-old that you didn't have any friends or anyone to help you deal with that stuff because no one knew about a G-tube. Meanwhile, here I am, closer to a different number age. I prefer not to say what age that is. But if it weren't for all these resources that I've had, it would be a lot harder of a road. And I've definitely, there's the OLI conference we go to and just talk with a lot of people who deal with the same thing, harder things. And no one's exactly like Dorothy either. And we found that too. Like there's no situation that works exactly the same, but finding those resources that are out there are great. And it's crazy. I do run into people all the time like, oh yeah, I used to have a feeding tube, or even people who are in their 20s and 30s who used to have TPN and stuff like that as well. So you get to be the encouragement for who you are, and that's kind of why I do this, because I want to share some of the stories of you who dealt with this at a young age as a father. And I think that would have been way more terrifying because I'd seen a few things by the time I had my kid, still terrifying every moment, and you still didn't know any of the answers.
Right.
But I was in my mid 30s rather than my mid 20s. So, my late 30s. So yeah, I still think that, I knew I could trust you. I knew I could call you and talk to you about that. And that was a big encouragement for me. So, but yeah, finding those communities, I think they're becoming more and more available. And for things like that. And that's, hopefully kind of why we do this thing. So, yeah. Well, Tyler, thank you, man. This has been awesome. I know you guys have been a huge encouragement to me and Megan, and I just am excited that you guys have gotten to the next step, which is very exciting. But we still have a lot of life left to live. So I'm sure you're going to deal with, just disciplining your kids and being a normal parent, because that's just as exhausting as all the rest.
Yes. Yeah.
So anyways, thanks for your time, and we'll hang out soon. And
All right, man. Let's do it.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.